This past year may be one of the most costly years for extreme weather events due to climate change, and it's only going to get worse. The GAO is looking at how the government is approaching climate resilience, which is the plans and preparations for climate hazards. Alfredo Gomez is Director of Natural Resources and Environment Issues at the GAO. Alfredo, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
So in general, how is the government doing in promoting climate resiliency?
Yeah, so the government most recently, through executive orders, has been addressing climate resilience through the development of climate adaptation and resiliency plans. This past October, there were about 20 of those plans that were issued, trying to identify what those climate risks are, but more importantly, figuring out how you're going to build resilience towards those risks.
So I want to start with the electricity grid. Climate disasters can damage the generators, the transmission lines. What are federal agencies doing to make those more resilient?
So exactly. So, the electricity grid is primarily owned by the private sector, but the federal government has a big role. And the role that it has is in providing information, climate risks, climate projections, so that they can build better resilience towards it. And as you said, climate change affects all aspects of the electricity grid, whether it's the generation, the distribution, the transmission, and even the demand for electricity. So it's really important for the federal government to do what it can to help build resilience to the grid.
I mean, you say that the federal government has a role in sharing information and things like that, but can't they require these companies to make the grid more resilient?
So one of the things that we have done, for example, we've made recommendations to the Department of Energy and the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, FERC. And for the Department of Energy, it's really for them to develop a department-wide strategy for how to address resilience to the grid, and also for FERC to do something similar, to identify what the risks are and to really respond to it. So they do work with the private sector to provide that information. So really it's in everybody's interest, right, to make sure that we have a reliable grid, because at the end of the day, it's the federal government that ends up paying for the repairs and all the costs, and then taxpayers, we end up paying for that. You
mentioned the Department of Energy. Do they actually have a strategy for protecting the grid?
So we recommended that they develop a department-wide strategy to do a better job. They've been taking steps and doing efforts, but really hadn't looked at it in the whole of government approach. So that's what we've recommended. And we're going to be looking at this issue some more in the coming year.
So Alfredo, climate resiliency can cost a lot of money. If you raise a bridge by 2 feet because sea levels are rising, that's a high cost. So what budget does that funding come out of?
Well, so, when disasters happen, it really just comes out from the federal government. We don't really budget for it. When those happen, we end up paying for them. But even for the Department of Transportation, we give billions of dollars to the states in transportation. And we want to make sure that those dollars are well spent by ensuring that they're building resilience, right? You mentioned that bridges have to be elevated. Some of the roads in our country that are federally funded get flooded on a regular basis. Some of those are affected by climate. So we've issued a report, and we told the Department of Transportation, we gave them many options where they can do a better job to ensure that those monies are well spent and that we're building resilience to those climate risks.
So really, it's each department deciding how much money they want to set aside for climate resiliency.
Right. So the Department of Transportation does have a program looking at climate resiliency, but we believe that they can do more. And so we've laid out 10 different options that they could do. Now, also in the bipartisan infrastructure bill that was recently passed, there is also money for resiliency projects. And in particular, there's some money for the highways to do resiliency projects as well. So there is set-asides there.
How is the Defense Department doing in protecting their installations?
Sure. So, climate change does present a risk to our DoD facilities. the Department of Defense's mission and its infrastructure. And so we've done work as well, looking at how well the Department of Defense, for example, was identifying the vulnerabilities of its installations. And we made recommendations there as well. Not just their domestic facilities, but also their facilities around the world, because they're all at risk from the impacts of climate change.
What about protecting their supply chain?
Yes, so supply chain is also very important, right? Because we rely on those goods and services that are coming to us. And if our roads are flooded or if the electricity is out, we can't get those critical supplies to the installation. So those are also very important. We've looked at that issue as well, and we've made some recommendations that agencies be better. Well, one, that they identify, right, what those risks are to their supply chains, and they respond to them so they can be better prepared.
I want to go back to the roadways because you estimate that climate-related damages to paved roads may cost up to $20 billion annually by the end of the century. So what is the Federal Highway Administration doing about that specifically?
No, and that is a really good point. We do spend a lot of money, right, when these disasters happen. And so we've recommended that the Department of Transportation, again, do a better job in the billions of dollars that we're giving out to make sure that the states who end up getting the money, right, and they're the ones that are funding the projects, but that they are building resilience to those roads. Because honestly, at the end of the day, we don't want to be rebuilding the same roads every time a disaster happens, right? We want to rebuild them in a smarter way, in a more stronger way as well.
All right, well, Alfredo, we'll leave it at that. Thank you so much for being on the program.
Thank you for having me.